Welcome to The Survival Historian, where the grit of survival meets the depth of history. Think you're ready for anything? What if anything meant a nuclear winter, not the Hollywood spectacle of mushroom clouds and heroes, but the grinding, month-after-month reality of a world plunged into darkness and cold? During the Cold War, ordinary people across America and the Soviet Union weren't just watching this nightmare unfold on movie screens. They were training for it. They were building shelters in their backyards, practicing decontamination in their schools, and stockpiling canned goods in their basements. Today we're diving deep into the survival manuals, civil defense drills, and tactics that shaped an entire generation's understanding of the unthinkable. This isn't just history. It's a challenge to confront the extreme and understand the vital knowledge our grandparents carried, hoping they'd never need to use it. The Cold War was fought not just with missiles and spies, but with information and fear. Civil defense experts understood something the public often missed. The real threat wasn't just the initial blast. Scientific research in the early 1960s began revealing the catastrophic aftermath that would follow a full-scale nuclear exchange. A nuclear winter would blanket the Earth in smoke and ash, blocking sunlight for months or even years. Temperatures would plummet globally, crops would fail worldwide. The survivors of the initial attacks would face a slow-motion apocalypse of starvation and freezing darkness. Government manuals, many authored by physicists who had worked on the Manhattan Project, laid out these grim realities in technical detail. They dispelled Hollywood myths of quick recoveries and heroic rebuilding. Instead, they painted a picture of a planet fundamentally altered, where the rules of survival would be rewritten. Publications like The Effects of Nuclear Weapons and Protection in the Nuclear Age didn't sugarcoat the science. They explained radiation exposure, fallout patterns, and the cascading environmental collapse that would follow. These weren't meant to paralyze civilians with fear, but to galvanize them into practical preparation. The cornerstone of Cold War survival training was simple: get inside, stay tuned. Civil defense programs drilled this mantra into millions of Americans. The first 72 hours after a nuclear detonation were considered the most critical window for survival. Radioactive fallout, invisible particles of deadly material carried by wind, would rain down across vast areas, penetrating buildings, contaminating water supplies, and turning the outside world into a lethal zone. Survival manuals provided explicit blueprints for constructing fallout shelters. The ideal shelter was underground, preferably in a basement, with thick walls of concrete, earth, or even tightly packed books to absorb radiation. Families were instructed to seal windows with plastic sheeting and duct tape, creating a barrier against radioactive dust. Inside, they would need supplies for extended confinement: 2 liters of water per person per day, non-perishable foods, battery-powered radios to receive official instructions, first aid kits, and essential medications. The decontamination process was rehearsed repeatedly. Upon entering a shelter, survivors were trained to immediately remove outer clothing, which could carry radioactive particles, seal it in plastic bags, and wash exposed skin thoroughly with soap and water. These weren't abstract precautions. They were life-or-death procedures based on hard radiation science learned from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Beyond the initial fallout came the truly harrowing challenge: surviving in perpetual twilight and cold. Nuclear winter meant agricultural collapse. With sunlight blocked and temperatures far below freezing, nothing would grow. Civil defense training acknowledged this brutal reality and attempted to prepare civilians for a world without supermarkets or supply chains. Water purification became a critical skill, as fallout contamination rendered many natural sources unsafe. Manuals taught methods for filtering and boiling water, emphasizing that even sealed containers could be compromised by radioactive dust. Food preservation took on desperate importance. Survivors would need to stretch limited supplies for months, possibly years. Foraging in a contaminated landscape meant understanding which foods absorbed radiation most readily, root vegetables were particularly dangerous, while sealed grains offered relative safety. Generating heat without electricity or gas infrastructure pushed survival ingenuity to its limits. Civil defense experts recommended wood stoves with proper ventilation, thermal mass heaters built from stone, and insulation techniques using whatever materials remained available. Maintaining hygiene in extended confinement with limited water and no sewage systems required careful planning to prevent disease outbreaks that could kill as surely as radiation. Cold War civil defense planners understood a truth that Hollywood, often ignored. No one survives alone. Community organization was emphasized as essential for long-term survival. Neighborhoods were encouraged to form civil defense units, pooling resources and skills. Someone knew carpentry, another had medical training, a third understood radio repair. In a post-attack world, these practical skills would become the currency of survival. The manuals didn't just address physical needs, they confronted psychological preparedness head-on. Maintaining hope in darkness, both literal and metaphorical, required mental discipline. Communities would need to establish routines, share responsibilities, and create purpose beyond mere existence. Children would need education to preserve knowledge. The elderly would need meaningful roles. Everyone would need reasons to keep fighting through each day. This wasn't naive optimism. It was hard-headed recognition that despair could kill communities as surely as radiation. Civil defense training emphasized that rebuilding civilization would require trust, cooperation, and the preservation of essential knowledge in a world stripped of technology and convenience. The most iconic Cold War drill was duck and cover, taught to millions of schoolchildren through films and repeated practice. At the flash of a nuclear blast, students were trained to drop to the floor, curl into a ball, and cover their heads and necks, protecting against flying glass and debris from the shockwave. While later generations mocked this drill as inadequate, it actually addressed a real threat, the thermal pulse and blast wave that would injure or kill anyone caught exposed. More comprehensive drills prepared families for extended emergencies. Blackout dinners had families practice preparing and eating meals without electricity, testing their stored supplies and non-electric cooking methods. Water scavenger hunts taught people to identify potential water sources in their neighborhoods and practice purification techniques. Shelter-in-place drills simulated days of confinement, revealing gaps in supplies, sanitation plans, and psychological preparation. These weren't theatrical performances. They were rehearsals for survival, identifying problems before lives depended on the solutions. The Cold War ended without the nuclear exchange that haunted a generation's nightmares. Yet the knowledge embedded in those civil defense manuals, the discipline practiced in those drills, and the resilience built in those communities wasn't wasted. Today, as geopolitical tensions rise again and new threats emerge, the lessons of Cold War survival training remain relevant. Understanding shelter principles applies to natural disasters. Water purification skills serve in emergencies. Our grandparents lived with nuclear anxiety as their daily companion, yet they didn't surrender to despair. They prepared, they practiced, and they persevered. That spirit of informed resilience, of confronting worst-case scenarios with practical action rather than paralysis, remains our inheritance. History teaches us that survival isn't about individual heroics or perfect preparation. It's about knowledge, community, and the stubborn human refusal to give up. If this deep dive into Cold War survival history has challenged your thinking or equipped you with new knowledge, hit that like button and share this video with others who value preparedness rooted in historical reality. Subscribe to The Survival Historian for more explorations of how humanity has endured through history's darkest chapters, and what those lessons mean for our uncertain future. Until next time, stay informed, stay prepared, and remember, history's survivors were ordinary people who simply refused to be unprepared.